in the army during the Cold War, and if there's one thing I learned, communists almost always lie. The biggest lie that they tell is to think that they speak for 1.4 billion people who are surveilled, oppressed, and scared to speak out.
And for anybody who's spent any time in China, they will know that that is the most ridiculous statement anyone could ever make. You know,
oldest culture they say is Egypt at 8,000.
埃及更古老一些，但是呢，文化没有断过流的，始终传承下来的只有中国。
Over the last 4 decades, the West has simply failed to get China right. From predicting the downfall of the Chinese regime after Tiananmen Square, the likely breakup of the country, the insistence that China's economic growth is not sustainable, and a one-party regime is certainly not able to sustain itself. Virtually no one predicted China's miraculous growth for the past 40 years, and a regime that enjoys greater legitimacy, prestige, and support from its people. When it comes to China, the Western mind is preoccupied with a lack of democracy, lack of human rights, and hazardous pollution. Not that these issues don't matter, but the insistence on judging China in Western terms block us from doing a far more important task: understand China in its own terms. Why is it so hard for the West to understand China? For the last 2 centuries, the rise of the West and its dominance exported Western democracy and Western technology literally to every country in the world. Most countries in this world are either westernized or moving towards westernization. Anything that deviates from Western values is compressed. This speaks not of wisdom, but ignorance. We're so used to and may not even aware that the Western culture is regarded as superior to any others. This arrogance of Western superiority becomes our greatest handicap. We're in an era where US is experiencing irreversible decline, Europe is already marginalized, and China is probably going to replace the US to become the world's dominant power. The countries we used to look down upon will increasingly become the arbiter of the future. If we continue to look at China from Western terms, we may never make sense of it. If we fail to understand it, we will never be able to see what kind of future is ahead of us. China is different. Though it began to reform itself by absorbing Western science and technology, Chinese civilization dates back over 2,000 years. Its cultural, history, and way of thinking makes it unique and at times the exact opposite of what the West thinks of China. So, are you ready to see China from the other side? To understand China, we have to talk about the family, which forms the basic unit of Chinese society. Traditionally, Chinese family structure is rigid and hierarchical. Filial piety is one of the key virtues in Chinese culture, among other 3 in the 4 classic Chinese virtues: loyalty, contingence, and righteousness, which defines the Chinese social morality and ethics. Filial piety was introduced by Confucius and has been practiced by Chinese for thousands of years. It's a virtue of respect for one's parents and ancestors. It defines the hierarchy within the family and how the family members should interact with each other. For example, the son needs to show reverence, respect to his father, perform duties to obtain material means to support parents, as well as carry out sacrifices to ancestors. The father in return needs to show benevolence to his son, provide for him, and act as a guardian to ensure his safety. The notion of the family is so deeply rooted in China that the notion extends to the relationship between the state and society. The relationship between the state and society in China is very different from the West. The West treasures individualism, Steve Jobs type of personality that could disrupt the entire system. People view the state with varying degrees of suspicion, even hostility. Most discussion around politics is how to limit state power to not let it take away personal freedom. In China, people view the country as a big family. Every Chinese is a member of the family, and the state is like a father or the head of the family. There's something you like about your father, and there's something you hate. Just like family needs a patriarch that shows both prestige and kindness, people needs a government that possesses both authority and benevolence. This is not to say China doesn't need democracy, doesn't protect personal rights, doesn't limit the state power, but to achieve the balance between state and society, the rules are very different between the West and China. The West achieved balance through constant fighting between society and the state. China achieved its balance by maintaining state and society relationship like a family. Families in China are perceived to have a collective identity. This makes the Chinese extremely united. The sense of unity manifests as a strong will to the unification of Chinese civilization, including its territory. In other areas, people are more concerned about the current situation and the wishes of the local people. But the leaders and people of modern China are deeply aware that it's a responsibility to safeguard the integrity and unity of the land of Chinese civilization. This explains why the Chinese have an unshakable will to reunite Taiwan. China is old. For the past 2,000 years, Chinese civilization developed many fields with Chinese characteristics and vibes that formed unbreakable attachment to its people. Subjects like religion, math, medicine, agriculture, physics, architecture, art, cinema, and way of living are all able to find their roots in China's history. Many of them are heavily relevant today. Unlike the West, who form its identity by nation, Chinese identity is based on a sense of belonging to its history and culture. This is very unique throughout the world, and this unique form of identity may help us understand what the world will be like when China surpassed the United States and became the world's dominant power. Since Deng Xiaoping opened China in 1978, he was able to recognize the mistakes Mao Zedong made and introduce two fundamental reforms. He introduced market into Chinese socialism with state planning. He integrated China into the global economy. The modern China is a hybrid of Confucianism and modified Marxism, a hybrid of state planning and market economy, a hybrid of rooted Chinese culture and Western science and technology. In the West, governance is focused on electoral democracy. State competence is regarded as secondary. Perhaps this is why incompetent president was elected in the US. The opposite is true in China. State competence is primary. Two examples explain the extraordinary competence of the Chinese Communist Party. Past 40 years of economic growth that raised the country's annual per capita income from $160 to over $10,000 a year, succeeded in eliminating the pandemic much faster than the West. Since Xi Jinping was elected Secretary of State in 2012, China changes from Deng Xiaoping's stance of building up its own economy to increasingly outgoing economic expansion, such as the Belt and Road Initiative and setting up businesses in Africa. This makes the West fear that the world is going to be dominated by socialism, meaning the breakup of democracy, the threatening of human rights, and authoritarianism. To understand the relationship between China and the world outside of China, there are two periods that we may be able to extract some insights. Tang Dynasty, which helps us understand China's Middle Kingdom mentality, the century of humiliation that is critical to understand another part of China's identity and its desire to return to global prominence. Chinatown, or Tangrenjie, is named after the title of the Tang Dynasty. Between 618 and 755, it was the most prevalent period in Imperial China. Not only was it the largest economy in the world, it was also the most open society in Imperial China. Some researchers say it was even more open than today. Foreign trade and Buddhism brought large number of merchants, entertainers, diplomatic ambassadors to China. They came from all over the its memory of being the international center of the world. Throughout history, China developed this Middle Kingdom mentality. Accompanied with it is a feeling of superiority. They think their civilization is outstanding among others. Because of this close-minded mentality, China stuck in outdated thinking and ways of doing things when on the other side of the world, Western science and capitalism develop, which eventually leads to a center of humiliation for this old country. As recently as the 18th century, China was still the largest economy in the world. Beijing was the largest city in the world. The years that followed crippled China at its foundation and became known as the century of humiliation. They were first defeated by the Britain in the First Opium War, then suffered from Taiping Tianguo uprising, a lengthy domestic revolt. They lost the Second Opium War to the Britain and France, and most humiliatingly, lost to their neighbor in two Sino-Japanese wars. A series of unequal treaties crushed China from the wealthiest country in the world to one of the poorest. It eroded its independence and, most importantly, damaged its pride. This humiliation is the core impetus of the nation's desire to return to global prominence. In the eyes of the Chinese, they're just returning to their natural place. So what's next for the world when China returns to its power position? The modern China is both old and new. More or less, almost every civilization thinks of themselves as the best, and their values are universal. As civilization rises in economic power, so does their sense of superiority. However, the universal value plays out differently between the West and China. The West thinks Western civilization leads to the most advanced human civilization. All other civilizations are to be converged to this single stream. The Western values spread mainly through territorial expansion, colonialism, and Christian missionary. The Chinese, on the other hand, also feels a sense of superiority of its civilization. But the way Chinese treat its civilization is more inward-looking instead of outgoing expansion. Their Middle Kingdom mentality makes them rarely in history conduct military expansion. Most of the time, they're in a defending position. This is not to say the Middle Kingdom mentality has no merit. It played a positive role in modern China's revival and construct Chinese identity. But on the other hand, this mentality may evolve into a type of cultural arrogance, an intolerance or indifference of cultural differences. China may continue to rise. There are plenty of reason to believe it. The way China is spoken today resembles the concerns the West has for Japan in the 1980s. In hindsight, Japan's place in the world has fallen considerably since then. It might be a fool's errand to foretell the future, but it's probably worth remembering nations do rise and fall throughout history. The Bible supports this historical pattern. Its pages also prophesy future shifts.